They said the room had a garden view. It was a brick wall, and no one picked up my calls for 6 days. That sentence lives in my mouth now. It arrives in the early morning hours, when the hallway smells of bleach and oatmeal, when the radiator clinks like it's remembering warmth. That sentence speaks before I do. I whisper it sometimes. Not out loud, but inside. The way you test a wound you know is still open. I am 82 years old. My name is Miriam Levy, and I live alone now, in a small apartment above a bakery, 2 blocks from the bus stop, 3 from the library. But this isn't where the story began. It began in that room. That brick-walled room that smelled of damp carpet and distant cabbage, where I sat waiting for someone, anyone, to remember I existed. I hadn't planned to move into a facility. That word alone, facility, makes my skin itch. I had a home, not grand, not new, but full of windows and books and a patio where the geraniums bloomed wild because I let them. I had a routine, a rhythm. Tea at 6, the newspaper folded just so. A quiet walk to the corner for milk, even when I didn't need it. But Rachel, my daughter, said I'd slipped, said I left the stove on, said I repeated myself. Maybe I did, maybe once. But that's all it takes, apparently. One forgotten burner, one story told twice. And suddenly you are a risk. Suddenly, they speak around you instead of to you. Suddenly, they call it concern when they erase your name from your own mailbox. She said it gently, with that practiced softness she uses when firing people or refusing requests. Just for a week, Mum. While we redo the kitchen, it'll be good for you. Structured. Safe. Safe. The most dangerous word in the language. I didn't argue. I hadn't argued in years, not really. The last time I raised my voice, she was 15, and slammed the door so hard the photo of my husband fell off the wall. I learned then that quiet buys peace, that silence feels like love if you're tired enough. So I packed my things into 2 suitcases and let her drive me across town to Rosewater Glen, which sounds like a spa and smells like a bus station. The woman at the front desk wore scrubs with cartoon lemons on them. She asked for my insurance card before my name. The walls were beige in that specific way that wants to offend no one and therefore erases everyone. Rachel had pre-registered me. All the boxes were ticked: allergies, medications, emergency contact. She'll only be here for a little while, Rachel told the intake nurse, just until we're back on track. The nurse nodded, but gave me the look. I know that look, the one that says they all say that. I was led to a room at the end of the hall, number 217, the farthest from the nurses' station. The window faced east, which meant nothing except the rising sun revealed the truth. A wall. A blank, brown, institutional wall. No garden. No view. Just brick. Rachel left soon after. Something about a meeting and traffic. She kissed my cheek like she was clocking out. "You're in good hands," she said. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her like a final punctuation mark. I sat on the narrow bed and waited. For what? I wasn't sure. An explanation? An apology? Maybe just for the moment when it would all feel like a mistake and someone would laugh and say, "Oh no, Mrs. Levy, you're in the wrong room. Let's get you to the nice one with the sunflowers." But no one came. No correction. No laughter. Only the humming of fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of trays. The first night was the hardest. The sheets were stiff and smelled of soap too strong for skin. There was no clock on the wall, only a digital display that blinked 12:00 like it had given up trying. I called the front desk to ask what time dinner was. Already past, the voice said. You didn't come down. No one told me. You should check the whiteboard, the voice added, as if I were a student who'd missed an assignment. I didn't eat that night. I didn't cry either. Crying felt too alive for what I was feeling. What I felt was less sharp. A dullness, like standing ankle-deep in cold water, not sure if it's getting deeper or you're just sinking. I called Rachel, straight to voicemail. Hey, it's me. I think maybe there was a mix-up with dinner. No big deal. Just wondering what time you're visiting tomorrow. Call me. I left it light, careful, digestible. Nothing that could be construed as need. The next morning, I checked the board. It said pancakes. I got toast. There was a woman down the hall who cried every morning between 7:10 and 7:30. Not loudly, just a steady, rhythmic weeping, like a faucet leaking somewhere you can't quite find. I didn't ask her name. No one introduced us. Names didn't seem to matter here. You were your room number, your dietary restrictions, your fall risk. I called again the second day. Rachel's voicemail again. I tried her work line, then the house, then her husband's cell. No answer. Just silence. A thick, echoing silence that filled the tiny room like smoke. By the third day, the nurse asked if I wanted to join the chair yoga class. I declined. My hip was fine. My spirit wasn't. I sat by the window, staring at the brick wall, thinking about my begonias, about the photo album Rachel couldn't find, about the piano I'd given up because there wasn't space. Funny how there's never space for what you love when someone else is packing the boxes. On the fourth day, I stopped calling, not because I stopped hoping, because I started remembering that this wasn't the first time Rachel disappeared when things got inconvenient. When her father died, she didn't speak to me for 4 months, said she needed time. She took the good crystal, though, said it reminded her of him. I said nothing then, either. Silence, again, as currency. I had banked years of it. I had bought her approval with my tongue bitten through. And now here I was, 82, alone in a room designed to be forgettable. The fifth day, I wrote my name on a paper napkin and stuck it to the door with the hospital tape. Miriam Levy. Just to remind someone. Anyone. Just in case they forgot I was a person. The sixth day, I finally asked the receptionist to call my daughter. Again? She said, not unkindly, but tired. Yes, again. She dialed, waited, frowned. Still nothing. She patted my hand. She'll call soon. They always do. But she said it like someone telling a child the dog ran away to a farm. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I remember the smell of disinfectant and the sound of someone coughing down the hall. I remember feeling like a ghost in a waiting room, not quite gone, but certainly not expected. In the morning, I opened the window. Not all the way, just enough to feel the air. It smelled like exhaust and something damp. And for some reason, that air, sour and honest, felt like the first real thing in days. That was when I started planning. Not an escape. Not exactly. A return. A quiet, steady movement back to myself. Because if no one was going to come for me, then I would have to come for myself. That's how it begins. Not with rage, not with rescue. With recognition of the brick wall, of the silence, of the truth that sometimes the people you raised will try to fold you into a corner like a winter coat no one wants to hang properly, and if you let them, you will disappear. So you don't. You stay, you speak, Even if the first person you talk to again is yourself. It happened on the 7th day. A Tuesday, I think. The calendar by the nurse's station had a sunflower on it and a sticky note that said, Group Bingo, 2 p.m. I stood there longer than I should have, pretending to read it, trying to make my presence known without being obvious. I had dressed carefully that morning. Cardigan buttoned properly, hair combed back, earrings on. I'd even dabbed perfume behind my ears, though it had soured in the dry air of the room. I was not invisible. I would not be invisible, but no one looked up. They moved around me with clinical precision, checking clipboards, shuffling papers, adjusting trays. I was an obstacle, a speed bump in their shift. So I walked back to my room slowly, a dignity-saving retreat. I sat on the bed and stared at the blank television screen. I didn't turn it on. I wanted silence that was mine, not theirs. Around 10:15, I tried again. I walked to the front desk and asked, politely, softly, if someone could help me make a call. I'd tried from my cell, but the battery had died 2 days earlier. I hadn't asked for a charger because I didn't want to be trouble. That's how they train you, you know. Not with orders, but with looks. With the pause before answering, with the sigh that doesn't quite become sound. The nurse, a young woman named Tasha, who always smelled faintly of cinnamon gum, handed me the cordless phone and dialed the number for me. "Is this your daughter?" she asked. "Yes, Rachel Levy. Please tell her it's her mother." She pressed the receiver into my palm and walked away. The phone rang 4 times, then voicemail. I waited for the beep and said, "Rachel, it's me? Again? I'm trying to reach you. I need to talk. That's all? Please call me back." I didn't sound desperate, just clear. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the phone like it might light up. It didn't. Around noon, I tried her work number. The receptionist there said she was out for lunch. I left another message. Then, against every instinct I had, I called her husband, Joel. He answered on the second ring. "Hello? Joel, it's Miriam." A pause. Then, "Oh, hi, how are things?" "Not great," I said. "Is Rachel available?" She's busy right now. Look, Miriam, she told me to let you know she's been swamped this week. Work's been a nightmare." "I understand," I said, although I didn't, "but I'd really like to talk to her." "I'll pass along the message," he said, and hung up before I could finish the sentence. That was the moment. Not the first moment of disappointment. That had passed. This was something else, a moment when the fabric of all my assumptions began to tear, not in one dramatic rip, but slowly, deliberately, as if someone had taken a seam ripper to the hem of my reality. I stood by the small window with its beige curtains and stared at the brick wall beyond. It had rained sometime in the night, and the wall was streaked with darker patches, like it had wept for me. By 3 o'clock, I had decided to call the house directly. Rachel's house. My house once. The one I had signed over under the promise that it would remain in the family, that it would be ours, a place for Sunday dinners and Hanukkah candles and grandchildren tearing through the hallway with sticky fingers and loud laughter. I still remembered how the wallpaper had bubbled in the corner of the dining room, how I'd kept saying we should fix it, but Rachel always said she didn't mind. I'd liked that about her once, her acceptance of imperfection. But now the number rang and rang until the machine picked up. Her voice, brisk and bright, said, "Hi, you've reached the Levy family. We can't take your call right now. Leave a message. Not Rachel and Joel, not Joel and Rachel, just the Levy family, as if I had never carried that name longer than anyone else in the line. I left no message. I just hung up and sat very still. At 4:30, Tasha knocked lightly and asked if I was coming to dinner. I nodded, stood, and followed her down the hall. I didn't ask what was on the menu. It didn't matter. The dining room was filled with small, wobbling bodies and big, empty faces. People chewed slowly, stared at their trays, spoke rarely. I sat at a table near the window, the one that faced the parking lot, and watched a grey sedan idle in a handicap space. For a moment, I let myself believe it was Rachel, that she would step out in her navy blazer, her phone tucked under her chin, a bag of my favourite magazines under her arm, that she'd walk in, apologising too much, her words fast and anxious, like when she forgot my birthday that year. But the woman who stepped out of the car was not Rachel. She was someone's daughter, maybe, but not mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, eyes fixed on the seam where the ceiling met the wall, and counted how many days it had been since I'd last heard my daughter's voice. 7. Not a lifetime, but long enough. Long enough to rearrange what you think love looks like, long enough to know when something has snapped clean through. In the early morning, I asked to use the phone again. This time I called Rachel's office and asked to speak to her assistant. I remembered her name, Ashley, because Rachel once said she was incompetent but photogenic. Ashley answered after 2 rings. "This is Ashley." "Hello, Ashley. This is Rachel's mother, Miriam Levy. I was hoping you might help me get a message to her. It's important." A pause. Then, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to—" "Just tell her I need to know when I'm going home," I said. My voice was calm, even. "I've been here over a week. She said it was temporary." "Right," Ashley said. "Okay, I'll make sure she gets the message." "Thank you," I said, and hung up. That was when I knew, not suspected, not feared, knew, that this wasn't temporary, that the just for a week was never about kitchens or safety or recovery, that the empty suitcase she packed for me was a prop, a way to sell me on the idea that this was a pause, not an ending, that Rachel had moved on. From me. That my daughter, my only child, had made a decision and dressed it up in softness so I wouldn't struggle, so I wouldn't see the knife until it had already been drawn. I walked to the mirror above the dresser and looked at myself. I didn't look broken. I didn't look lost. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had made too many allowances for people who believed their comfort was more important than her dignity. I looked like a mother. I looked like a woman who had handed over her life, piece by piece, and been thanked with silence. And that's when I began to plan. Not out of spite, not from anger, but because I had one thing left that no one could sign away for me. Choice. They thought I'd sit and wait. They thought the bricks outside the window would become my horizon. They thought if they didn't answer, I'd stop asking. They were wrong. The thing about a slow erasure is that no one ever calls it by its name. They call it routine or adjustment or part of the process. That's what they said to me the morning I asked for a different room. I didn't even make a scene. I simply asked, with the full dignity of someone who has spent her life saying please and thank you, even when it wasn't owed. I said, "I was told there would be a garden view." The brochure showed a courtyard. I don't see anything like that from my window. The woman at the desk smiled the way people do when they've stopped listening halfway through your sentence. That's just a sample image, she said. All our rooms are equal. I nodded. Equal in their blankness, equal in their resignation, but not equal in their cruelty. Some walls allow light. Mine did not. Some windows hold hope. Mine held nothing but the face of a wall built to separate, to contain, to mute. After that, I stopped asking for changes. I learned the rhythm. Wake. Washington, wait. Meals were served on trays, slid through gaps in conversation. Once, I asked for more coffee and was told they were out. You should have asked sooner, the aide said, as if I'd been late to something important. As if I hadn't spent 60 years waking before dawn to make coffee for others. That afternoon, I walked the hallway. Not fast, just enough to remind myself I had legs. I passed room after room of silence, of slumped shoulders and paused voices. One woman sat near the vending machine knitting something in brown wool that had no visible form. We didn't speak. We just existed beside one another like parentheses around an unspoken sentence. The TV in the lounge was tuned to a channel that played nature scenes over flute music. No one watched. The remote was gone. The volume was low. Even the elk looked bored. On the 10th day, my room number was wrong on the med chart. They brought me blood pressure pills meant for someone else, Mr. Levin, 2 doors down. I told them, gently but firmly, that I was not Mr. Levin. The nurse frowned. You sure? She asked. Because he's usually in this room. I had to show her the sticker on my chart, the name on the door, my ID. She shrugged. It happens. Then she left, leaving behind the pills and the echo of her indifference. It was a small thing, but it lodged inside me like a splinter, a reminder that here your identity is provisional, conditional, that even your name can be erased by clerical error and low lighting. The food got worse. The eggs were grey, the peas translucent. I once found a piece of plastic in my pudding, and when I pointed it out, the KitchenAid said, "Better plastic than bone." I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I just pushed the tray away and drank water from a styrofoam cup that collapsed slightly when I held it too tightly. My neighbour, a woman named Bet, whispered once that she used to be a violinist. Her hands trembled constantly now, and I don't know if she was telling the truth or dreaming out loud, but I believed her. There was something in the way she held her spoon, like it had once been a bow. She didn't talk much. None of us did. The silence grew like mold in the corners of the room. Quiet, slow, persistent. Rachel still hadn't called. Not once. I had left messages. I had written letters. One of the nurses had offered to scan and email them. It's easier, she said. People check email more. But I never saw her do it. Never saw her fingers move across the keyboard. Never got a reply. At some point, you stop counting days. You start measuring time by the number of times your name is said aloud. Mine was said 3 times that week, twice by mistake. Once by the janitor who said, "Excuse me, Miss Levy," when I stood too long in the hallway near his mop bucket. That was it. 3 acknowledgements in 7 days. Fewer than most dogs receive in an afternoon. The clothes I brought began to disappear, not all at once. A scarf, then a blouse, my good sweater. I asked the laundry staff, and they said things get mixed up. That's why we recommend labeling everything. I hadn't labeled anything. I hadn't thought I would be here long enough for it to matter. One morning, I saw another woman wearing my scarf. I didn't say anything. What would I have said? Give it back? It didn't matter anymore. Ownership was a flexible concept here. Identity even more so. We were all versions of each other, variations on a theme of quiet loss. What changed everything wasn't a crisis. It wasn't dramatic. It was a clipboard, a form, left in my room by accident. I don't know if the nurse was careless or rushed or simply didn't notice she'd placed it on my nightstand instead of someone else's. But there it was, a document labelled Long-Term Residency Recommendation, Levy, Miriam. My heart didn't skip. It didn't race. It just slowed slightly like it was taking a breath. I read the whole thing. It said I had adjusted adequately, that I required minimal intervention, that, due to lack of consistent familial contact, permanent residence was advised. Permanent. A word like a sentence. No end. No release. Just time, flattening into sameness. That night, I went through the drawers of the tiny dresser and inventoried what I had left. 2 blouses, 1 pair of slacks that fit, 1 that didn't, my walking shoes, a half-used bottle of lotion, a comb, no mirror. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, faint and soft against the brick. I barely recognized myself. That scared me more than anything else. More than Rachel's silence. More than the brick wall. More than the idea of dying here. It scared me that I was forgetting the angle of my own face. I began to write again. Not letters, not journals, lists, names, places, memories. I wrote down the name of the bakery where I bought challah every Friday for 30 years, the name of the dog we had when Rachel was 7, the name of the song I danced to at my wedding. I wrote because I needed to remember, because I needed proof, not for anyone else, for me. To anchor myself to the person I had been, to keep from being diluted by beige paint and hourly check-ins and pudding cups. The woman in the next room died that Thursday. I didn't know her name. I heard the staff whisper it in the hallway, something with a J. Her bed was stripped by noon. By 3, a new resident had moved in. That night, they served turkey meatloaf and called it comfort food. I looked around the dining room and saw nothing but pale faces and bent necks. No one cried. No one even paused. I don't think anyone noticed, except me. And I couldn't tell if I was mourning the woman, or mourning how quickly she'd been replaced. That was the day I stopped playing along. I didn't go to the activity room when they called. I didn't take the Jell-O when it was offered. I asked for tea and made it myself in the communal kitchenette, using a bag I'd hidden in my drawer. Earl Grey. The smell alone reminded me of mornings when I mattered, when someone waited for me to rise. I sat at the table, sipping slowly, and for the first time in days, I felt the shape of my own silence shift. Not the silence of being ignored, the silence of choosing not to speak. That's power. That's presence. The next morning, I asked Tasha, gently but clearly, if she could bring me my personal file. I said I wanted to review my medical chart. She looked surprised, then uncomfortable. "I'm not sure I'm allowed," she said. I smiled. "Then ask someone who is." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." I knew she wouldn't. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I'd asked, not pleaded, not hoped. Asked, as someone who knew she was owed an answer. Later that evening, I borrowed a pen from the receptionist and filled out a change of address form from a rack near the entrance. I wrote down Rachel's address. I wrote it slowly, deliberately. Then I scratched it out. I wrote another one. A P.O. box I still remembered from years ago when I used to send letters to a friend who moved to Oregon. I wasn't sure it still existed, but it was something. a placeholder, a seed. It would be another few days before I acted, before I packed the few things I had and left. But the shift had begun. That quiet, essential tilt away from waiting and toward deciding. The first escalation wasn't a scream. It was a whisper I finally listened to. The one that said, "You don't have to stay." It was raining the day I left. Not heavily, not dramatically, just a steady, indifferent drizzle that made the pavement shimmer and the sky feel like it was holding something back. I'd packed the night before, what little there was to pack. 2 blouses, my walking shoes, the small bottle of lotion, and my notebook. I left the sweater with the burn mark from the radiator. I left the beige slippers they'd issued me my first night. I left the chair with the broken armrest and the teacup that always tasted faintly of plastic. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't want a performance of concern. I didn't want anyone to suddenly remember I had a name, a history, a voice. I wanted the silence to remain honest. I took the elevator to the lobby, coat buttoned, hair combed, shoes dry from having been placed on the radiator all night. The receptionist looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. She asked if I needed help getting to the van. I smiled and said no. I told her I had a cab waiting. That was true. I had called it myself the day before, using the same cordless phone they'd handed me with size. The driver was a young man with tattoos on his neck and a voice that cracked like he was still growing into it. He didn't ask questions when I said I needed a ride to the train station. He helped with the bag. He didn't call me Mum. That mattered more than he knew. At the station, I bought a one-way ticket, not because I had a plan, but because I didn't want to pretend I did. I chose a place I hadn't seen in decades, a name that still meant something to me, though I couldn't say why. It felt far enough to matter, and near enough to reach without needing permission. The train was half empty. I took a window seat and kept my hands folded in my lap. As the suburbs blurred into fields, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Motion. Not the shuffle of being moved, but the pull of choosing. The difference between being placed and placing yourself. The town looked smaller than I remembered, not in size, but in scale, like I had grown in the wrong direction and now didn't fit into its old corners. I checked into a small motel with thin walls and a receptionist who wore a sweatshirt with a missing drawstring. The room smelled of disinfectant and hope in equal parts. The bedspread was scratchy. The window faced an alley. But it was mine, and no one knocked. I slept that first night with my shoes on, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't used to feeling safe. Safety had become something people assigned to you like a label, not something you claimed for yourself. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the corner bakery. It was still there, though under new ownership. The sign had changed. The door handle hadn't. Inside, the air smelled of sugar and yeast, and something that reminded me of my mother's kitchen. I bought a scone and ate it slowly, sitting by the window. No one rushed me. No one watched me. I was just a woman eating breakfast, and that anonymity felt holy. I asked the girl behind the counter if she knew of any places that rented rooms. She pointed me toward a corkboard near the door. I read each note carefully, running my fingers over the thumbtacks like braille. One listing caught my eye. Room for quiet woman. Private, small. No smoking, no drama. Cash only. The handwriting was firm, like someone who didn't repeat herself. I called the number from a payphone. The voice on the other end was gravelly, female, suspicious. "How old are you?" she asked. 82, I replied. A pause. "Are you clean?" "Yes." Quiet? Mostly. No boyfriends? I smiled. Not in decades. She snorted. Come at 4. Bring first week's rent. She gave me an address, then hung up. That was all. No small talk, no questions about references or credit, just terms. Clear, unadorned, reasonable. The house was faded blue with chipped paint and a wind chime that sounded like it had something to say. Joyce was waiting on the porch. She wore sweatpants and held a cigarette with more authority than grace. Her eyes were sharp. Her voice tired. "You're the old lady?" she asked. "I suppose I am." She stood aside. "Come in, then." The hallway was narrow and full of books. The kitchen smelled of onions and lavender. A cat watched me from a windowsill. The room was small. Bed, dresser, single lamp. But the window faced west, and the light poured in like apology. I paid in cash. She didn't count it. She just folded the bills and handed me a key. That night, I unpacked. I folded each item with care, as if it were testimony. The lotion went on the nightstand, the notebook under the pillow. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel triumphant. I just felt present, like I'd re-entered the world without asking anyone's permission. In the morning, I made coffee in the little machine on the counter. Joyce didn't speak until after her second sip. "You looking for work?" she asked. "Not really," I said. "But I don't mind it." She grunted. People always need help they don't want to admit they need. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood. 3 blocks down, a cafe had a chalkboard sign, "Help wanted, mornings." I walked in. The place was humble, the counter dented, the girl behind it barely older than a memory. I asked for the manager. A stocky woman appeared, eyes like glass marbles. "You have experience?" she asked. "I've made coffee every day for 50 years, I said. "I can smile without meaning it and carry plates without dropping them." She nodded. "Trial shift tomorrow, 6 a.m. I said yes. That evening, Joyce made grilled cheese. We ate without talking. The cat purred, like it had been waiting for sound. I didn't call Rachel. I didn't turn on my phone. I wasn't hiding. I was resting. Not from danger, but from dismissal. And rest, real rest, is a dangerous thing when you've spent a lifetime being useful. The next morning, I showed up at the cafe in a pressed blouse. I was early. The kitchen smelled of onions and burnt toast. By 8, my feet ached. By 10, I knew I'd come back the next day. Not for the money, for the rhythm, for the way the customers said thank you like it mattered, for the way Heather, the manager, didn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my rented room and saw my face again. Not the one Rachel saw when she made decisions, but the one I remembered from before I was reduced to just until the kitchen's done. This was not the end. This was not victory. This was not revenge. This was motion. This was the beginning of beginning again. I didn't hear from anyone for 17 more days. Not a text, not a call, not even a piece of forwarded mail. My phone stayed off, tucked in the bottom drawer beneath the socks I bought with my first paycheck. I didn't want to turn it on. Not yet. The silence had become a kind of music. Low, steady, predictable. I learned to navigate the rhythms of the neighborhood by foot. The bakery with the raspberry bars that were too sweet but honest. The library where the clerk always asked if I wanted a bag even when I said no. The corner where a woman in a red jacket sold flowers from a cart with one squeaky wheel. Life began to form grooves. My hands remembered how to wipe down counters, how to carry 4 mugs at once without spilling, how to smile just enough to be kind without opening anything I didn't want opened. Heather, the cafe manager, spoke in grunts and glances, but she began setting aside the crossword section for me. A small gesture, and all the more sacred for its wordlessness. Arthur came in every morning at 9:10 on the dot. He was tall and bony, with careful posture, and a cane he insisted was only for crowd control. He ordered the same thing, coffee, black, with a side of quiet. I liked him immediately. He didn't fill silence for the sake of it. He respected a slow reply. By the 4th visit, he'd brought in a photograph of his wife, long gone. She had a laugh like a piano falling downstairs, he said, sharp, loud, hard to forget. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt good to imagine that sound. By the 2nd week, he brought me a paperback book about migratory birds. I told him I liked finches. He said crows were smarter. We never argued. That kind of peace between two people doesn't come from shared opinions, but from mutual exhaustion. Not weariness with life, but with all the parts of it that try to shape you into someone more convenient. It was a Sunday when Joyce handed me a letter. No return address, just my name, handwritten in shaky script I recognized instantly. Kieran, my grandson. The only one who used to visit without being told to. The only one who once built a birdhouse with me and painted it red, saying, "This will be the coolest place in the whole yard." The letter was short. 5 sentences. No guilt, no blame. "Dad and Lisa are freaking out. They said you disappeared. No one's heard from you. I've been checking every day. I miss you." At the bottom, his new phone number. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. The world I had left behind had noticed my absence. Or rather, someone had. I didn't call him. Not yet. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my phone. For the rest of the day, I felt like I was holding something fragile under my ribs. A memory, a question, a door half opened. That night, as I poured tea, Joyce glanced up and asked, "News?" I nodded. "From the boy." "The good one?" "The only one." She didn't push. She just passed me a plate of toast. We sat in our usual silence, the kind that doesn't demand explanation. The next morning, I counted out tips and felt a strange sense of steadiness. Something was forming. Not a future exactly, but a shape, a spine, a reason to hold my chin a little higher. Arthur noticed. "You look taller today," he said. "Must be the apron," I replied. But it wasn't. It was the first time I realized I didn't want to go back. Not to the house, not to Rachel, not to any room with a brick wall and a locked window. 3 days later, I saw Lisa. She stood outside the cafe, just past the edge of the awning, pretending to read the menu painted on the glass. Her coat was too elegant for the drizzle, her posture too composed for accident. I didn't go to her. I finished wiping down the counter, refilled the sugar, restocked the stir sticks. When she stepped inside, I didn't flinch. She waited until the cafe emptied, then walked up to the register. "Martha?" she said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I nodded toward the back booth. "Go ahead, I'm listening." She sat carefully, like she was afraid of being seen. "I didn't know Adam sent someone," she began. "The lawyer. That wasn't me." I nodded, but leaving me in a room with a brick wall was. Her face twitched, almost too fast to notice. "We thought it was temporary. You didn't answer your phone. I called you. 6 times. Over 6 days. She looked down. Her hands were clasped so tightly, I thought she might hurt herself. I didn't think you'd actually leave, she whispered. I didn't think you'd vanish. I didn't vanish, I said. I arrived somewhere else. She pulled an envelope from her bag. This isn't money. It's just pictures. From Kieran. And a note. He doesn't know I'm here. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. If he wants to reach me, he can. She nodded. He might. Then she looked up, and for a second, I saw something unfamiliar in her face. Not guilt, not grief, just fatigue. I wasn't trying to replace you, she said. I just didn't want your shadow in every room. And there it was. The honesty, small, sharp, undeniable. I stood. I'm not your shadow, Lisa. I'm my own person. And I finally remembered how to be one. She didn't argue. She didn't even finish her coffee. She just left. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. Me and Kieran in the garden, him on my hip. Both of us laughing at something now long forgotten. Behind it, a note. I remember. Just 2 words, but they held the weight of years. That night, I turned my phone on. It buzzed like it had been holding its breath. 32 missed calls, 19 voicemails. The oldest, from Lisa. Martha, we thought you were in the bathroom. Please call us. We're boarding. I replayed it. Once. Twice. It was calm. Too calm. Practiced. The other messages grew more frantic, then accusatory, then cold. Adam's voice. Where are you, Mom? Later. This isn't funny. And finally, fine. Do what you want. I deleted them all, except the one from Kieran. I saved his number. The next morning he called. I didn't let it ring twice. Grandma? His voice cracked. I'm here, sweetheart. A pause. You're okay? I'm better than okay. Another pause. Where are you? Somewhere I chose. He didn't ask more. He didn't guilt me. He just said, I'm glad you're safe. I miss you. I miss you too. And that was enough. Later that week, the lawyer returned. He stood outside the cafe in a tailored coat, too clean for real weather. He waited until my shift ended, then stepped inside and asked if I was Mrs. Martha Harlow. I didn't like his tone. Measured, cautious, like speaking to someone unstable. They're concerned for your safety, he said. They'd like to ensure your environment is suitable. Maybe arrange a transition. I folded my apron. Tell Adam and Lisa I'm not a pet they forgot to pick up. There are no next steps unless I decide to take them. He fumbled. They're just trying to do what's best. They already did what they thought was best, for themselves. I'm doing the same. I walked past him, out into the cool air. Arthur was waiting on the bench. He didn't ask what the lawyer said. He didn't need to. That night, I wrote one more letter. 3 lines. To Lisa. I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now. I've finally started mine. I mailed it the next morning with a stamp that had a bird on it. A finch. The kind that sings even when no one's listening. I expected silence. I didn't expect Lisa to come back. But she did. A week later, she stood in the cafe again. This time without the coat, without the envelope. I saw the lawyer didn't get far. she said. I didn't respond. I think you hate me, she added. No, I said. I just don't need you anymore. She nodded, like someone who finally saw herself in the mirror. Kieran wants to visit. Alone, I said. Yes, she whispered. Alone. She left after that. I didn't watch her go. That night, Joyce poured wine into chipped mugs and raised hers toward me. Still hiding? She asked. Healing, I said. But the hiding was nice while it lasted. She nodded. To women who stop asking for permission. We drank. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, it was warm. It started with a phone call I hadn't expected to return, not from Kieran. His voice was now familiar, regular, a thread I had begun to braid into my new life. But from a woman named Evelyn Saul, a probate attorney from my old neighborhood. Her tone was clipped, professional, but laced with the kind of hesitation that meant she had news she wasn't sure I would want. Mrs. Harlow, I've been contacted by your daughter regarding the reallocation of property and assets you previously placed into a family trust. She stated you were no longer able to manage your affairs independently and has requested that we activate the durable power of attorney filed last year. I didn't say anything, not because I was confused, but because I was stunned by how familiar this felt. The way someone could use a piece of paper to undo a life. I let her finish. She explained that the document gave Rachel and her husband full control over my estate in the event of cognitive decline. She used those words carefully, like tiptoeing across a moral swamp. Do you feel, Mrs. Harlow, that you are capable of making your own decisions? I laughed, quietly. Not out of humour, but disbelief. I've been making decisions alone for the first time in years, and not once have I misplaced my mind. Only my trust. She was silent for a moment, then cleared her throat. In that case, I'd be happy to help you initiate a revocation and restructuring process, but I'd advise urgency. She gave me her email address. I wrote it down on the back of a cafe receipt. I didn't lose it. The rest unfolded like something slow and sharp breaking loose under your skin. A month of forms, of documents mailed back and forth, of notaries and witnesses and calls made from the library's computer terminal because my cell phone still made me flinch. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell Adam. I told Kieran, carefully, and he listened like someone learning a language he always should have spoken. He offered to help, to drive, to come in person. I told him I'd let him know if I needed that. I didn't. I had Joyce. I had Arthur. I had Evelyn, the lawyer who spoke like she was building a wall behind me, brick by brick, to stop the past from crawling back in. One rainy Thursday, I signed the final papers at a borrowed office across town. A narrow building with green shutters and a humming fluorescent light that flickered whenever someone flushed a toilet upstairs. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't need to be. I wrote my name in slow, steady strokes, Martha Ann Harlow, and watched the ink dry like it was sealing something sacred. That's it, Evelyn said. From this moment forward, you're the sole executor of your own estate. The trust is dissolved. All powers of attorney have been formally revoked. I nodded. And the house? Still legally yours. You can sell it, gift it, leave it to your cat if you want. I smiled. I want to leave it to someone who never tried to put me in a room with a brick wall. She smiled back. That narrows the list, doesn't it? When I stepped outside, the sky had cleared just enough to show a patch of blue between heavy clouds. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, maybe spring, maybe relief. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. What I felt wasn't release, but arrival. I wasn't just free. I was back in possession of something I hadn't even realized I'd forfeited: authorship. Of my name, my choices, my story. On the way home, I bought a bunch of daisies from the woman on the corner. She tried to wrap them twice, but I told her once was enough. I want them to feel the air. That night, I told Joyce. She poured a small shot of bourbon into our chipped mugs. "You're a dangerous woman now," she said. "God help anyone who thought you'd go quietly." I raised my mug. God help me if I ever think quiet is the same as peace. We toasted, not to war, but to sovereignty. Later, I called Kieran. "It's done," I said. He was silent, then asked, "What now?" I thought for a moment. Now I decide what to do with the house. I don't want it, but I don't want them to have it either. "Then give it away," he said, "to someone who needs it, or turn it into something better." Like what? Like anything that isn't a silence machine. The phrase stuck. Silence machine. That's what the house had become. A place where I was tolerated, not heard. Where I was stored, not known. I spent a week thinking about what to do. I imagined selling it, donating the money to a women's shelter. I imagined letting it sit empty, a ghost house that refused to be repopulated. I imagined setting it on fire. That one made me laugh. In the end, I found a local non-profit that offered transitional housing for women over 60 who had been displaced, some by family, some by illness, some by nothing more than time. I called their director, a woman named Norma, who spoke like every syllable was earned. I told her I had a house. She came to see it 2 days later. I met her on the front lawn, the grass overgrown, the mailbox still bearing the sticker Rachel had chosen, the Levi Harlos. Norma walked through each room without judgment. She touched the wallpaper, asked about the wiring, listened when I described the light in the kitchen during early morning hours. "It's not fancy," I said, "but it's safe, and it could be more than safe." She nodded. It could be recovery. It could be refuge. We signed the papers the following Tuesday. I didn't tell Rachel until after. She left a voicemail that night. 3 words. "You'll regret this." I deleted it, not out of spite, out of hygiene. The final moment came quietly. A key dropped in an envelope. A short article in the local paper, "Elder donates home to support at-risk women." No name, by request. Just a story. The kind I wish someone had written when I was younger. The kind that said, "You're not done. You're not discarded. You're just between versions of yourself. Let the next one be chosen, not assigned." That night, I sat by the window in my room, the good room, the one that faces the alley but catches the sun in late afternoon, and watched a crow land on the fire escape. It stared at me, head tilted, then flew away. I thought of Arthur and how he said crows were the smartest birds. I thought of the lawyer who looked at me like I was fragile, and the nurse who handed me the wrong pills, and the daughter who used kindness like camouflage. I thought of the wall outside the window in that first room and how it never changed. And then I thought of now, of here, of how I was still learning how to be visible, one choice at a time. I turned off the lamp. I poured a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of locked doors. I didn't need to dream of escape anymore. I'd already walked out, and I hadn't looked back. There's a quiet now that I didn't know how to name before. Not the silence of neglect, or the hush that falls when you enter a room and people pretend you weren't the topic. not the dull absence that clings to institutional walls or the muffled stillness of being ignored by your own blood. No, this quiet is something else. It's the sound a room makes when it belongs to you, when the objects stay where you place them, when your footsteps are not monitored but merely heard, when your voice echoes not because it's unanswered, but because you've finally spoken from the center of yourself. It's the stillness of being whole. And it's taken me 82 years to arrive in it. Every morning, I wake before the alarm. I sit by the window, watch the light gather itself slowly in the corner of the room, and drink my coffee from the same chipped cup with the faint blue rim that Joyce says reminds her of her mother's china. Sometimes I see the neighborhood children running to school. Sometimes I see nothing but wind bending the branches. I don't fill the time. I don't rush to prove anything. I've spent too many years being useful to others. Now I practice being true to myself. That's harder, but better. Kieran visits often, not out of guilt and never out of duty. He comes because he wants to, because I'm not a burden to him. And he knows now that I'll never again accept being treated like one. We walk sometimes. We talk. He tells me about his classes, his friends, the terrible landlord he plans to outwit legally and gracefully. He listens when I speak. I mean really listens. Not the nodding kind, not the hum to keep you talking kind, but the kind where his whole face is still. When I told him what I'd done with the house, he didn't say it was brave. He didn't say it was noble. He said, "That was yours to decide. I'm proud that you did." And that meant more than any title, more than any apology I'll never get. I don't expect Rachel to understand. I don't even expect her to call. The truth is, I'm not waiting anymore. For so long, I sat by the phone like a dog trained to associate a ring with affection. But that's over. I no longer live by someone else's willingness to acknowledge me. I don't need reconciliation to find peace. Closure, I've learned, isn't a door someone else has to open. It's one I can close myself, gently, and then walk away from, barefoot, through the garden I built on the other side. Joyce says I've gotten sharper. I laugh when she says it, but she's right. I speak differently now. I ask fewer questions that start with, "Do you mind if I—" and more that begin with, "I'd like to." I spend time with women who've been through things that don't make it into polite conversation, women who know what it's like to be softened down into silence, then flattened by expectation. We drink coffee and tell stories, and sometimes say nothing at all. And in that nothing, we are more alive than we ever were in all the years we performed ourselves for others. Sometimes I get letters from the women now living in that house, the one I gave away, not in anger, but in clarity. They don't know me by face, but they thank me anyway. They describe the kitchen, the soft creak of the floorboards, the way the back garden catches the sun. One woman said she sits on the porch and feels like she's living inside someone's forgiveness. That one made me cry. Just once. Just enough. And now I write. Not memoirs. Not a book. Just small things. Notes. Stories. Sometimes a sentence I want to save for a day when I feel unsure again. I write to remember that I am not just someone who endured, but someone who acted, who chose, who walked away from a place that said, "This is all you are now," and proved it wrong. So if you're listening, if you're sitting in a chair that isn't yours, staring at a wall that has no story, waiting for someone who doesn't call, you need to hear this from someone who finally woke up. You are not a relic. You are not too late. You are not selfish for wanting more than survival. Get up. Find your shoes. Leave quietly if you must. But leave. Find the window with light, the one that opens. And if it doesn't, Make a door. I did, and I'm still walking through it.